Hello everybody, welcome back to this series of videos dedicated to Orlando Furioso. Today we're going to read together Canto number 12, which is a very fast canto. It's probably one of the quickest and fastest cantos, even if it has 94 stanzas. With the reference to Canto 12, one of the biggest fans of Orlando Furioso in Italy, who is Italo Calvino, in his book about Orlando Furioso, had something very interesting to say. The poem we're walking through is a labyrinth in which other labyrinths open up. At the heart of the poem there is a trap, a kind of vortex that swallows the main characters one by one. The enchanted palace of the wizard Atlante. Already the magician had made us meet in the Pyrenees hills, a castle made entirely of steel. We've seen that before. Then he had made it dissolve into nothingness. Now, in the middle of a meadow not far from the shores of the channel, we see a palace rising which is a vortex of nothing, in which all the images of the poem are refracted. With this new palace that he has created, Atlas has generated a kingdom of illusion, something that could have been born out of Luis Borges' imagination, for example, or other South American authors, or maybe Umberto Eco as well, because it's not really a physical place, but it's much more a metaphysical place. It's something where every one of the biggest knights of the story are converging, because every one of them is under the illusion that they've seen that one thing, the most important thing that they are looking for, and they end up constantly seeking it without, of course, ever finding it, because it's all an illusion.
Oh, really?
And we have to remember that this is actually the third time in the poem that Atlas, the magician, is trying to keep Ruggiero safe in the way that he wants, in the way that Atlas wants, safe from the prophecy that Ruggiero will have to die young right after his wedding, once he's married and once he converts to Christianity, because Ruggiero is a Saracen. The first time he tried was with a steel castle where he had imprisoned Ruggiero. The second time when he ordered the hippogriff to take him to Lavinia's island. And this will be the third time. We're going to see a lot of action and adventure in this canto, but there is not really a resolution around this new palace of Atlas, and we're going to have to wait at least another 10 cantos before Astolfo will come and in a certain sense resolve the situation of the palace.
That's right.
But let's start from the beginning, and as always, especially with easy to read and fast to read cantos, I'm not going to go too much in the detail of the plot, which is really easy to follow, but I'm going to just simply stop on a couple of references to classical myths and references that I would like to make on specific original Italian stanzas that I find particularly beautiful or that I'd like to highlight for some reason. Here is stanza 1. Cerere, poi che dalla madre idea, tornando in fretta alla solinga valle, là dove calca la montagna etnea, al fulminato encelato le spalle, la figlia non trovò dove l'avea, lasciata fuor d'ogni segnato calle. This is a myth about Ceres. She was the goddess of agriculture, and it's a very complex myth, but in short, her daughter Proserpina had been abducted by Pluto from a place where she had hidden her, and she thought she was safe. As soon as Ceres realized that her daughter had been abducted, she went crazy, almost in a way that's similar to what will happen to Orlando when he becomes Furioso later in the poem. She will start screaming, scratching. She started scratching herself, pulling her hair out, and she also, especially in the myth told by Ovid in the Metamorphoses, she actually was so strong that for her madness she uprooted 2 pines. As we know, Orlando has been looking for Angelica, and during his searches, at a certain point he sees a knight who seems to be running away with Angelica on his horse. So Orlando starts chasing him, of course, we don't know yet, and he doesn't know, that this night is an illusion. It's an illusion created by Atlas to capture Orlando in his new palace. So as soon as Orlando gets to the new palace, he cannot find Angelica, obviously because she's not there, but he does find many other knights, especially Saracen knights like Ferraù, Gradasso, Sacripante, and other ones who have been attracted, all of them by the same technique. Stanza number 12, in fact, describes very precisely what the problem is with this palace. Stanza number 12. Tutti cercano il van, tutti gli danno. Colpa di furto alcun che lor fatt'abbia. Del destrier che gli ha tolto altri è in affanno. Ch'abbia perduta altri la donna, arrabbia. Everybody has a different reason to be there, because everyone is following a different type of desire, of illusory desire. And this gives the canto as a little novella within the poem a particular depth, a particular interesting aspect about it.
Oh, really?
Something very similar happens to Ruggiero, and Ruggiero is also finally captured by Atlas Palace. Then Ariosto moves us to the director, he moves us to Angelica. Angelica has resolved in herself to go back to her home in Catai, but she's thinking, it's too long of a journey to do by myself. I need some kind of escort, some kind of guide. And the perfect guide for me would be either Orlando or Sacripante. And it's interesting how she doesn't seem to really care more about one or the other. She only needs them for practical reasons. And fortune or fate makes it so that she is going around and looking for them until she actually finds the palace of Atlas as well. We can read this at stanza 25. In fact, in the middle of stanza 25. Fortuna al fin là dove il conte Orlando, Ferraù e Sacripante era là in via, con Ruggier, con Gradasso ed altri molti, che avea Atlante in strano intrico avvolti. Strano intrico means a very strange web, a spider web. Then Ariosto gives us a rare glimpse into Angelica's psychology. And even if it's not the first time, we already looked into her thinking, her thoughts in the very first cantos, and we saw how opportunistic actually this character of Angelica can be. So as soon as she arrives at the palace, she's starting to think which one is because she has the invisibility given by the ring, so she's still protected. Which one of these two knights would be the ideal one, the best one for me to show myself and then ask him to be escorted? Sacripante or Orlando? And her thoughts are really amusing to follow, because on one hand she says, well, Orlando is very strong, he's a great knight, but, and this is something that Barbara Reynolds' translation misses a little bit, because she only mentions a great knight, but Ariosto says that Angelica thinks that if she chooses Orlando, se il fa signore, meaning she will have to make him her lord. Therefore, there's going to be some kind of automatic possession of her by Orlando in choosing him, because he's so elevated as a knight. He would be even more elevated as her knight, her lord. While with in Sacripante's case, even if he's a good knight, being that he's a Saracen, she can elevate him as much as she wants, but then she can just drop him whenever she wants, whenever she doesn't need him anymore, and that's why she decides to choose Sacripante. However, just in that moment, when she decides to show herself to Sacripante, Orlando and Ferraù arrive there, and everything happens. Everybody, at least these three knights, all of them want to get Angelica. She runs away, and while she's running away, there is a very interesting stanza, which is number 33, where Ariosto, I noticed that he's using one of his double senses. Stanza number 33, the last two lines. In Italian, he says, non vede li tre amanti in compagnia, che forse tolti un dopo l'altro avria. And Barbara Reynolds translates, over a hill and dale she'd take the help of any, one with pleasure, but three are two too many. And so she keeps hidden, and she lets these three make a lot of mess by themselves and fight among each other. If it follows a very long scene with a very interesting dialogue between Ferraù, Orlando, and Sacripante running away as well, fighting, that occupies a big chunk of the second part of this canto. Now, speaking about double senses, and Ariosto loves them because he loved to read them out and make everybody laugh in the court. There's another one that is very strong. In fact, this one, I don't think Barbara Reynolds wanted to translate it literally, and therefore, in the translation of Barbara Reynolds, it just doesn't come through. So let me read it to you. It's in stanza number 39. Stanza 39, the last two lines. So, per le più vili e timide puttane, che da conocchie mai traesser lane. This conocchie means, the conocchia is the distaff to spin a yarn. And lane is the yarn, but more precisely, it means wool. And Barbara Reynolds does not translate this type of naughtiness. She translates as follows. She says, if he'd mistaken us for common riffraff, or timid maidens sitting at their distaff. It's a good translation, but it really avoids the double sense completely. Because if we translate Ariosto literally, what he's actually saying in these two lines, in fact, in the last three lines of this stanza, is what could this guy say if he saw us and if he took us for the most vile and shy prostitutes, the ones who, even from conocchie, from the distaff, never took out wool or never took out yarn. So now the double sense is quite clear. So finally in Canto 45, we have a moment when Ferraù reveals himself to Orlando. And since Canto 1, Ferraù had sworn to fight Orlando and steal his helmet and use it for himself. So there is a lot of fighting, verbal fighting first. Then there is an equivocation because Angelica, apparently, she's getting bored. It's incredible, but that's how she's thinking herself. She's getting bored of seeing these three knights interact with each other. Therefore, to put a little bit of salt and pepper, she moves away. She removed the helmet from a branch where Orlando had put it. And they think that Sacripante stole Orlando's helmet. Moving on with his adventures, Orlando meets two groups of people, two armies, we can say. They are both armies of Saracens. One is led by Manilardo, King Manilardo, and the other one is led by Alzirdo. They're both working on the side of King Agramante. And King Alzirdo is a very arrogant king, and he tries to fight Orlando immediately, and it doesn't go very well. We can see in stanza 76 where Ariosto says levasi un grido subito e torrendo che d'ogni intorno n'ha l'aria ripiena come si vede il giovane cadendo spicciare il sangue di sì larga vena. The young king falling he's losing so much, he's spraying so much blood all around because he tried to fight Orlando. Now the other king will be in the battlefield, and it's really interesting how Ariosto describes the battlefield with two impersonifications of abstract concepts. One is death or morte in stanza number 80. In stanza number 80, errando va morte crudele, morte, death, goes around the field, very cruel. And in the second next stanza, he talks about virtue. There was also wandering around the battlefield, and only one person had the courage to look into the mirror of virtue, and this was in fact the King Manilardo. The canto ends with Orlando finding something like a cave, where he finds an old woman and a lady. Ariosto calls her a virgin, who is very sad. She's crying, And Ariosto says, if you want to know a bit more, you need to keep reading. Thank you so much for listening to another episode, another canto of Orlando Furioso.